This is Recipe for Sleep, a podcast where we dust off very old cookbooks and let them lull us into dreamland. I'm Erin Brindley, a chef and storyteller. If you're a frequent listener, you know we've been savoring 365 desserts for quite a few episodes now. And while I love those recipes that are like little poems, we're going to wade into something a little different tonight. I came across the 7th edition of the American Pastry Cook from 1894, and it is completely delightful and very dense. It's written by a professional hotel and steamboat chef, and written with large-scale cooking in mind, with notes for the home cook who may want to try hotel-style pastries. And it begins with a series of essay-like annotations, which I will begin to read you this evening. The passion with which our author, Jessup Whitehead, argues the use of the word receipt versus recipe, which he calls the aristocratic trisyllable, is both droll and dull. A perfect place to put your busy brain as you fall asleep. Perhaps my favorite quote, regarding the home cook trying to make their own bread starter. An attempt to do too much is very apt to end in weariness. I just love that. We won't get to any recipes tonight, just lots of advice. If it's the repetition of the recipes that soothes you to sleep, please return to one of our earlier episodes. There are 18 in our back catalog that are mostly, if not entirely, recipes. But I think you'll enjoy this, and do let me know. If you'd like to read more of my own stories and recipes, you can find my Substack linked into the show notes, along with the original text for this episode. And now, put away anything you were doing and snuggle deep into your sweet covers. Imagine the kitchen of your mind. There are 2 cupboards there. Yesterday's cupboard, for all the things that have already happened that your mind wants to chew on. And tomorrow's cupboard, for all the things you're going to do or what's going to happen later. It's time to put everything away in those cupboards. Imagine closing each one. You made it to this cozy, quiet time of day where there's nothing to do but listen to me read you old cookbooks until you drift off to sleep. Volume 1 of the Oven and Range series. The American Pastry Cook, 7th edition. A book of perfected receipts for making all sorts of articles required of the hotel pastry cook, baker, and confectioner, especially adapted for hotel and steamboat use, and for cafes and fine bakeries, by Jessup Whitehead. Chicago, Jessup Whitehead & Co., Publishers, 1894. Advertisement. This book is especially adapted for use in hotels, boarding houses, confectionery cafes, restaurants, and eating houses generally, in which respect it enters upon a field hitherto unoccupied. The quantities of the receipts are calculated for what experience has taught the author are the average orders of about 50 persons choosing from a full bill of fare, but which are really only about 30 portions. In many of the more important matters, such as puff paste, bread and rolls, cakes, ices, creams and pie mixtures, and in cold meat dishes, corned beef management, and salads, the standard of 1 pound or quart used will be found to make the receipts equally useful for private families, and the trouble of dividing the larger quantities in other cases will probably be fully repaid by the simple conciseness of the directions, the absence of all technical jargon, and the professional knowledge of the art of cookery imparted in every page. The book is unique also in having all the articles directed to be made graded in regard to cost, to meet the requirements both of those who do cooking for pleasure and those who are concerned in cooking for profit. Since the above was first printed, another book has been issued by the same author, in which all of the receipts are reduced to the gauge of meals for 6 or 8. It is especially adapted to teach cooking as a trade for women in private houses, and includes everything likely to be of use for the purpose, arranged in order from the cheapest meals up to party dinners and suppers. It's called the Chicago Herald Cooking School. Introductory in the National Hotel Reporter. For any apparent presumptuousness there may be in spreading these cooking receipts and instructions before the professed cooks of the country in the most widely circulated and most influential hotel journal, I have to offer as an apology that I was long ago impressed with the singular fact that among all the excellent cooks, hardly any could be found who worked by any rule or measure. This was especially the case with American cooks. They knew how themselves, but could not have given exact instructions even to their sons without first instituting a series of experiments, and their knowledge perished with them. I simply set to work to reduce my portion of the general knowledge to exact figures, and the merit claimed, therefore, is not for very extraordinary skill, but rather for the painstaking industry that has never allowed a receipt to be put away marked OK without being satisfied that it was quite reliable. Another consideration offered is that the stewards and others who buy for cooks to use, not being, in great majority of cases, practical cooks themselves, are apt to consider many of the demands of the cooks for certain kinds of materials necessary to good work as but unreasonable whims, not worthy of notice, and it is difficult to see how the requisite explanations are ever to be made, unless through some such means and medium as the present. J.W., National Hotel Reporter, October 1878. Receipt or recipe? Which is right? Worcester says that a recipe is a receipt for cooking. Also, that it is a formulary or prescription for mixing certain articles, particularly in medicine. Webster also makes recipe and receipt appear nearly synonymous terms, and attaches to the former a particularly medical meaning that is nowhere made to belong to the other. The French recette, which appears to be the original of our receipt, is pronounced like it, and yet all the French books have recipe instead. Of half a dozen different articles in the grocer's shelves, 4 have recipes printed on the package, while others give receipts. Of 6 persons talking together, 4 or 5 will say recipe, the rest receipt. The label on the bottle tells you that the sauce beside your plate was prepared from the receipt of a nobleman of the county. But the nobleman's only authoritative English cookbook uses recipe. By its side is another later and very compendious work, which is advertised as containing so many thousands receipts. Still another more recent and even more compendious London book uses the other word. Both words are right, but which is the better? Several hundred pages of the matter, which is proposal to publish this column, has been written with the word recipe, according to the observed practice of the majority. But after all, it was decided to change it, and for reasons perhaps as immaterial as the difference between the 2 words in question. Still, the minority side having been taken, it seems best to state the case. A city man, wise in the ways of bread-making, was at an old Yankee farmer's house, instructing his housekeeper in the best methods of making homemade Boston brown bread, and used the word recipe frequently. The old man was not illiterate, but excessively old-fashioned, and the trisyllable annoyed him past bearing. He laid down the churchman that he had been reading and leaned back and listened. Then he took off his glasses. Then he began to remonstrate. Oh, don't bring these affected city words among us plain people. Recipe, he repeated with immeasurable contempt. My parents always said receipt. My neighbors all say receipt. What would they think of us if we should go among them putting on such airs as that? As I overheard this, and a cutting philippic which followed, aiming at city affectations in general, my faith in the power of high-sounding recipe to soothe the savage breast was considerably weakened. A long time after, and at a very distant place, a lady schoolteacher was heard to say, I am so glad if receipt is the right word instead of recipe. The latter seems so much like a stranger in a foreign dress among our familiar English words of the same dimensions. When I have taught my pupils to indite and recite, it is troublesome to make them understand that a recipe is not to be pronounced that way at all, and then again to stop them from making two syllables out of ripe, wipe, and pipe. This was another blow at the aristocratic trisyllable, but it seemed hard to descend from the lofty heights where it prevailed to the level of common. Fortunately, just at that time, the great house of the Harpers published the most polite cookbook that has yet appeared. It made extreme correctness a special feature. It was typographically perfect. It hyphenated every coconut. It split hairs on teaspoonful. It followed Noah Webster whithersoever he might lead. It was the glass of fashion and the mold of form, and with all this, it adopted receipt instead of recipe. There was no more room for doubt. Higher precedent there could not be, and so, if the reader pleases, as far as this column is concerned, we will render unto the doctors the Latin trisyllable which is there, and use only the humbler but safer English receipt. Notes to the second edition. The American Pastry Cook, having met with so much favor that a second edition has become necessary, it may perhaps be allowed me to make a statement of the simple origin of the book, as much as anything in acknowledgment of the kind encouragement of a great number of friends who bought undoubtedly without any thought of using it. All such books, if worth considering at all, have had a motive, either to introduce foreign methods, found a new school of cookery, teach new extremes of ornamentation, or put into practice the theories of great chemists, or of new idea doctors, Liebig Graham, the vegetarians, and the like. The Oven and Range series was not so deliberately planned, and if a motive may be claimed in this case, it is to make good cooks, such as are always wanted, and to raise the occupation of cooks in America, at least to the dignity of a recognized trade. When, a good many years ago, I used to find myself in positions on sea and river, in hotels and restaurants, where the assistants always coming and going were generally willing enough while they stayed, but could not do good work, I began to see the absurdity of knowing what I wanted done, and yet being unable to make others understand. And I began penciling down weights, measures, and directions for them to work by. Not pastries alone, but a little of everything, and hanging these directions on the nails, along with each assistant's portion of the bill of fare for the next meal. All cooks that are worthy of being called such are emulative and try to excel. They hit it exactly in making a dish sometimes are highly elated and wish they could always have such good luck. In my own practice, whenever any of us hit it exactly, I simply penciled down how it was done and kept on changing and improving until I was in a great measure independent of the circumstances of the boys jumping out. Anybody smart enough to work by directions could make what I told them. These receipts were necessarily plain and as necessarily correct and reliable, and they were of great value. In course of time, there were some hundreds of them, and they made a bulky package. Is there any wonder that the thought occurred that they would be more useful in print? Is there any need to explain further why the writer has confidence in this book? Those exact and plainly worded receipts, with others of course added, form the Oven and Range cookbooks. There has been nothing but pleased surprise, kind words, and good reports connected with the circulation of the pastry book, as far as it has gone already, the anxiety being expressed in numberless instances to obtain more books of the same sort. The careful plan adopted of making the work reliable in every particular has prevented it being written and finished in haste. Little desserts. This book has been taken up with avidity by many outside of hotels, seeking instructions how to make nice, sweet dishes, some of whom seem to think they know all they need to learn of meat cooking when they can broil and fry, but who acknowledge the difficulty that prevails everywhere when well-to-do people ask why they cannot have at least a few of the dainty trifles at their private tables that they have enjoyed in such profusion at a few very good hotels. It is, briefly, because pastry cooking cannot be picked up like meat frying, but must be learned. In order to help the matter, I will suggest things to be tried. Let those who would not have pies every day, and only pies, practice the different cream fillings, and make all sorts of delectable forms of pastry of them. I have called some of these conserves, because the word cream is worked to death. The articles alluded to are pineapple cream or conserve, apple cream, orange conserve or tart filling, lemon conserve or lemon honey, transparent pie mixture, coconut and lemon pie mixtures, pastry cream or custard, chocolate cream, cheese curd mixtures, and many more that are in the book, but which need not be named. Let it be observed that all of the receipts for making them are perfectly reliable, and they can be taken up and used any time without fear of failure. This will be found a perfect little mine of good things. When they are understood, make tarts in patty pans of them, then covered tarts, then cheesecakes, apple shortcake, Napoleon cake, Saratoga shortcake, apple turnovers, mince patties, using different creams or sweets at different times. Then make the open tarts with meringue on top like lemon pies. Make apple shortcakes with meringue or frosting on top or between the layers, and so you can keep on indefinitely. Then take notice of the fruit charlottes, the apple and peach charlottes, and Friar's omelet. Since the book has been published, I've seen two of the most accomplished French cooks of this part of the country practicing those articles with others from it with evident interest and satisfaction. For it does not follow, because a man is a splendid cook already, that he must have practiced everything that is known. We are all still learning, or trying some old favorite for the first time. Then, attention should be paid to the many varieties of boiled custards in cups. There are tapioca custard, rice, farina, sago, manioca, granula coconut, chocolate, caramel, wine, and plain custards flavored. The receipts give you the exact proportion to make them so that everybody likes them, and they direct you to serve them ice cold. There are custards with whipped cream on top, and with frosting browned over, and custards baked and steamed. Then remember the different dishes made with cake and custard, the floating islands, the gypsy pudding, and then the different ways of making a charlotte russe. I write these lines in the interest of people who want nice things on their tables and, not caring particularly about the cost, wish to know how it is that cooks in general have such a very limited knowledge of this line of business. As the utmost pains has been bestowed upon the book in the hope to supply this deficiency of knowledge, I can do no less than point them and their cooks to these pages. Then there are the molded creams, which to know how to make perfectly is a pleasing art in itself. They are blancmanges, the Bavarian, chocolate and strawberry, Roman, and all that line. Most of the finest foreign menus have a Bavarian cream in some form or under some name, as Bavarois à fraise with strawberries, or au chocolat, or otherwise, and so many of the diplomatic and court banquets show the same. They can all be easily made, and are simple when once learned. I have always found that something of this sort is highly appreciated at the end of a dinner, particularly when there is no ice cream. While claiming to excel in making these creams myself, and having made others working under me excel at the same line of articles, I must own that I would not, to use the common expression, touch with a 10-foot pole these so-called creams as they are commonly made by unskillful cooks. But they are served daily in great perfection at a few of the very best Chicago hotels. Everything necessary to be said about them has been set down in the directions in the book. The puddings alone will furnish a change and variety that may surprise many who try them. And some are so little like pudding, they seem to deserve a finer name. Where all are good, it is sincerely fair to single out any, yet, to point the meaning, I will instance the bird's nest pudding as being almost a dish of baked fruit, and not least, there remain the fritters both plain and with fruit, meringues of cake and fruit and pastry, and fruit frosted over, and jellies and compotes. And every one who delights in making little desserts is continually inventing some new combination. And we have not yet mentioned the ice creams. About whipped cream. In close connection with the Bavarian and Italian creams, the pure whipped cream, regarded as most delicious amongst desserts, has to be considered. Those creams, when genuine, are made of pure whipped to froth and stiffened with gelatin. The amount of gelatin required is only half an ounce to a quart of cream, when it is but to fill a charlotte russe, or be a simple cream in a mold. But if strawberry juice and pulp is to be added, or maraschino or wine, then an ounce to a quart will be needed. If you put pure cream in a deep pan, set it on ice, and beat with a wire egg whisk, it will become thick and firm enough to fill small charlottes without anything added at all, except, of course, a little sugar and flavoring, and it will not go down again as long as it is kept cold. When the greater firmness is wanted, so that it can be turned out of a mold, the half ounce of gelatin to a quart must be dissolved in a little warm milk and poured into the cream while you are whipping it light. But there is so much difficulty in most hotels in getting cream for the pastry cook to use that I have about given up the use of it altogether. It is not always the question of cost that makes the difficulty, but the actual scarcity of cream and the greater need for it in other ways than in pastry. So the receipts made for the creams and charlottes will be found to call for no cream, but use milk instead. They can be made so good that the lack of cream is never observed. The difficulty does not so generally exist when parties in private houses are to be given, and I advise the use of pure cream when possible, although it is valuable to know how to do it without. Individual Charlotte Russe. A favorite little dainty of this sort is sold at the city confectionaries that is made in a proper case, size and shape of a common tin cup of the half-pint size. A sheet of sponge cake is baked on paper, taken off and cut in pieces that will fit just inside the cases. A bottom piece is put in, then the charlotte is filled with a spoonful of whipped cream, sweetened and flavored, but whipped up without gelatin. But they are made for fine parties in paper cases of the shape of small tumblers, wider at the top than at the bottom, so that they can be taken out of the case when served, as the pattern with straight-up sides cannot. These are lined with either cake or ladyfingers, but to give them firmness enough to be removed from the cases, a little gelatin has to be added to the pure cream, as explained in the note about whipped cream. But another way, most suitable of all when these little charlottes are to be served at ball suppers, as they can be held in gloved fingers, is to make them in handsome ornamented paper cases, size of small tumblers, which may be bought ready-made for the purpose in some places, or otherwise can be made of fine, unruled paper at home. The lining may be sometimes of white cake, and another time of yellow, and either pure whipped cream or any of the made creams can be used for filling. The same sort of charlottes are held in high favor at hotel dinners when they are formed in deep muffin rings without bottoms, kept very cold, and slipped out of the rings when served. I have practiced that more than any other way. A cup of pure, thick cream, when whipped, fills about 8 of these small charlottes, so that a calculation can be made of how much will be required. Individual puddings. It is the practice in all the best hotels to serve the puddings in individual forms. In the receipts in this book, it will be found that the baked puddings are all directed to be cooked first by boiling the main ingredients together, then adding the eggs, and then to be baked only a short time. This baking is done in white bowls that hold from a cupful to a pint, and the puddings are served in the same bowl, set in a plate and an individual pitcher of sauce with it, if the pudding needs sauce. For family dinners, graniteware or tin dishes are in use with an outside silver-plated dish to hold it, and a plated ring to drop over and cover the rim. Custard puddings, macaroon, brandy, cabinet, and a number of others described in the book can be cooked in the cups and then turned out in the saucers to serve. Boiled or steamed puddings can be cooked in individual tin molds and turned out on saucers. An improved way of cooking steamed apple roll and other fruit puddings of the same sort is practiced in places where the steaming facilities are good. The pudding is not a roll at all, and no cloth is used, but a crust rolled out is laid on the bottom of a pan, then a layer of chopped apples, another crust, more apples, and a third crust on top. Then it is set in the steamer, cut out slices or squares. It is but little trouble and does just as well. A light dough made with plenty of baking powder and no shortening whatever is employed in some of the paying restaurants for steamed apple roll. Ices. Let none be deceived about the ices in this book, because they are offered without the imposiveness of tremendous French names. There is no finer assortment of ices known than these on the following pages. The changes and combinations possible with them are practically endless, and one who is master of them need have no fear of ever getting left in the competitive trial. It is hard to say in such matters as these exactly where old patterns are departed from and originality begins. It is true, however, that these are all newly adapted to hotel use, being on the whole an invention of a set ways of serving a magnificent array of ices in places where the resort to mold and brick shapes was not possible with the small number of hands employed and perhaps the comparative scarcity of ice. I keep up a constant run of novelties by serving two kinds at once in the same saucer, or a glass, and making ices of almost every kind of sweet and fruity material. In order to do this without making incongruous mixtures less acceptable than the common ice cream, the greatest care and skill must be exercised in both compounding, coloring, and freezing. Even if we make the old foreign favorites, they have to be supplied with plainer names for the hotel bills of fare. Take, for instance, Tutti Frutti. When the hotel keeper has ice cream provided, he of course wants the guests to know it and get the good of it. But not 1 in 100 of them that makes it to the hotels knows what Tutti Frutti is by that name, and much disappointment may be felt on that account. I would not be understood as advising the use of even the terms attached in this book to the several combinations. That is a matter of indifference. When you have two fancy ices at once, perhaps a pale green grape ice and a deep-colored frozen custard, call it ice cream in the style of your hotel or of some other famous one. In regard to the Tutti Frutti receipt in the book, it ought to perhaps be said that the outer coating of orange ice is not necessary for common dinners. It is an extra touch for a mold or bomb. This sort of frozen pudding can be dished out of the freezer with or without a white ice, like a frozen sauce at the side. The sense of some of these extras is never apparent until you have a table decorated with crystal, china, and flowers to supply. The best workmen, after they have made the 3 creams or fruit ices for a Neapolitan and frozen them in a brick shape or in Neapolitan molds, take them out a good while before dinner time, wrap each form after it is taken out of the mold in manila paper, and put them in a large freezer well packed with ice and salt, and keep them there frozen and dry until they are wanted. This saves hurry and melting by handling while dinner is going on. Line your brick molds with manila paper, or at least the bottom and top, before putting in the ice cream. It is easier to take the cream out, and also makes the lids fit tighter. Bread. A good deal of wholesome enthusiasm has been evoked by the contents of the Book of Breads. The slight drawback has been that those who followed out the proper method of working the dough may have been surprised by their bread becoming too light. That is, of being ready to bake before they believed it could be, and before they were ready for it. It is stated in the directions that under proper methods the dough needs no coaxing, no setting under the stove. It will rise almost anywhere. A hint may be taken from the management of Vienna bread, the dough for which it made light once, then well kneaded, made into loaves, cut across the tops, and baked very soon after, without being allowed to get much proof or rising in the loaf shape. It is put in an oven that is very hot at first, but built with a low roof so that the bread crowded in fills the oven with steam, in which the baking is finished. Ovens not specifically built for Vienna bread have a steam pipe leading into the oven to serve the same purpose, and rotary ovens have wet bricks thrown into the fire to fill the oven with steam. However interesting the subject, it will generally be found too much trouble to make stock yeast in very small houses. But a starting may be obtained from some friendly baker, or else dry yeast cakes must be used to start the ferment. An attempt to do too much is very apt to end in weariness. But all pastry cooks ought to make the stock sometimes, to keep in practice, even if they are using the compressed in a regular way. Attention is particularly called to the method in this book of taking a piece of light dough from the bread or rolls to make various light, fancy breads, muffins, waffles, and the like. It not only makes the directions short and plain, but makes it easy to turn out a great variety with but little extra trouble over common bread. One setting of sponge does for everything. Plain covered pies. It has happened several times during the introduction of the first edition that I have had to hear unfavorable comments upon the pies and pastries of some generally good workmen, in the form of a hope by the steward, clerk, or proprietor, as the case has happened to be, that the book would give them a hint to make the old-fashioned covered pies, and not the heavy and greasy ones they were making. It is much to be feared that our book has fallen short of its duty in this particular. Still, it has been said over and over that puff paste is not good unless it is perfect or nearly so. Some kitchens and pastry rooms are so hot, it is impossible to make fine paste in them. And, after all, the greater number of people are as well or better pleased with a good short paste. Take 2 cups of lard to 7 cups of flour, or a pound of shortening to 2 pounds of flour, add a little salt, and rub them together dry. Wet them with ice water, mix up, and give the lump paste 2 or 3 rollings in order to make it flaky. The same sort of paste, but more crisp and dry, can be made with suet, chopped extremely fine, weighing or otherwise making sure that you have enough. But when suet is used, it will be found best to mix up with water slightly warm, that the suet may be soft enough to spread and be flaky under the rolling pin, and then let the paste stand in a cold place until wanted. Good cooking apples and other pie fruits can be put in the pie raw and a little sugar sprinkled over, then a top crust put on. These, after all, are the real American pies. Our open pies, with fine, high puff paste edges, are tortes, flans, and vol au vent. Strawberry shortcake. Some dissatisfaction has been expressed at the strawberry shortcake question being left in this book in an unsettled condition. But it is a fact, as everybody knows, that when strawberries first come in, all the confectioners' windows display different kinds of strawberry shortcake that are anything but the true article, being sometimes squares of sweet cake with strawberries on top, and whipped white of egg on that, as little like the proper thing as it possibly can be. I have no hesitation now in saying these are all wrong, and the only genuine article is made as I was schooled into making it myself years ago by the wife of the present Secretary of the Interior, one of the most critical judges of cookery, as she is herself one of the most accomplished cooks among all the ladies in the land. Make a short paste, as directed in the preceding note, for covered pies, only using fresh butter to rub in the flour instead of lard. Roll out nearly as thick as for biscuits. Place on jelly cake pans and bake. Cover the strawberries with powdered sugar in a bowl and shake them up to mix. Split the shortcake, spread strawberries on both halves, and place one on top of the other. There will be strawberries, of course, on top as well as between. Serve a pitcher of cold sweet cream at the side. There should not be baking powder or any other sort of rising in this cake, but the cold butter alone, which makes it light enough. City and country pastry cooks. Having paid attention in the foregoing notes to some things that they in the front of house have said, it is in turn to mention that some pastry cooks claim that it takes a much smarter man to be a first-class pastry cook or meat cook, either in a country hotel or in a hotel in any small city, than it does in a perfectly fitted-up great house in New York or Chicago. It is argued with perfect justice that in these great establishments, one man does but one set of duties within certain hours and has everything properly adapted for his to use, and such one could not begin to do as well as the general pastry cook in the ordinary hotels of small cities does, with all the deficiencies and disadvantages he has to contend with. This thing properly considered by employers would often save them the disappointments they experience when, thinking they will be made up and get their work done right, they send for a pastry cook from the big city and find that he either cannot or will not try to get along when they have got him. The young men that have learned and practiced only one department of hotel cooking are not the ones that give satisfaction in small houses. The pastry cook of these houses have to invent their own ways and learn to do splendid work under conditions that would make the others afraid to take hold and try. On account of his thus becoming used to adapting himself to the place, the oven, and the utensils, the chances are much better for getting a great variety of first-class pastry work from an active, interested, general pastry cook who has learned in hotels of medium size than from those under the steady routine of the great caravanserais. Hotel keepers should encourage the training of pastry cooks in their own ways in their own houses, as there are no other places for them to learn general work in. About ovens. Brick ovens are indisputably the best for hotels, yet because they are not often met with, when one is put in, the pastry cook who has been used to baking in a portable sheet iron oven or a range or stove finds it awkward to begin the new way. Good pie baking can be done in the portable ovens, for they will bake on the bottom, and good use can be made in the top of the firebox to boil jelly and stew fruit when room on the range is not to be had. But still they are very imperfect. They scorch the bread on one side, they are entirely unsuitable for baking cake, and will not keep anything hot without drying the bottom and sweating the top. There is an immense number of them in use, although many pastry cooks and bakers will not work with them at all. The same money that buys them would build a brick oven. Every town has one or more bricklayers or builders who can build an oven, and some have a specialty in that line. It will cost from $40 or $50 upwards to $150 or more for an ordinary oven. The patent rotary ovens run from $500 to $1,500. They are for the largest establishment. The floor rotates over the fire. The heat comes up through a hole or a hub in the center and around the circumference. The door is rarely closed, but the articles put in as the bottom passes the door are carried around, and if small, when they come to the door again, they are done. Revolving ovens carry the shelves and pans up and down, baking all over alike. Common ovens are of two patterns. The simplest and cheapest has no furnace, but the fire is made in the oven itself, on the floor, and when hot enough, the oven is raked out and mopped clean, and the articles put in. Only one heat at a time can be had, and the things that need the most heat go in first, then the bread, after that the cakes. The other sort has a furnace at the side. The heat goes into the oven on its way to the chimney hole at the top. It may be known when the oven is hot and where the cool corners are by the smoke that blackens it all over when the fire is first made, but disappears and leaves the bricks white when they are hot. When you have an oven built, be careful to stipulate for a good bed of sand under the tile bottom. It holds the heat and is essential to the making of a good oven. After a few days of practice, one who has not been used to an oven learns how long before it is wanted the fire must be started to heat it, and learns by the feel and by the appearance of the inside when it is at the right heat for any purpose. Jelly roll. On the account of the common difficulty of getting blank paper to use, as I have done my part towards abolishing the need of it by baking sheets of sponge on baking pans without paper. Very few, however, can manage it quickly enough, and the cake dries and breaks. Newspapers cannot be used for this purpose because they are apt to leave the news of the day impressed on the cake in printing ink. Either thin manila or blank newspaper should be furnished to the pastry room. By weight and measure. It pays to have scales and be exact. The pastry cook does not want the pudding to come out soft and slop over the saucers, nor the lemon pie to be soft and run off the crust, so he throws in a lot more eggs if he cooks by guess, because he knows they will cook solid and dry up. Or he wants another pudding to be soft and mellow, and he throws in a lot more butter, knowing that will prevent it being dry and tough. But in most cases, the extra eggs, used only to make sure of a doubt, do more harm than good, and the softness, like custard, that is wanted can be produced better by adding water or milk than by butter. The whole course of guesswork cooking is full of errors. The objection that weighing takes up too much time must be met by placing scales and weights in a position where they are always ready for instant use, on a little shelf, nailed up about a breast high at the back or the end of the pastry table. Spring balances are of no use because they will not weigh by ounces. Common scales with iron weights are by all odds the best, for graded beams take too much attention to find small quantities. The scales once placed in easy reach, there is nothing more needed to be done than get them into use, for the pastry cook is too glad to have a dead sure thing on whatever he does and no failures to neglect the weighing that is made easy. There are certain proportions of ingredients in every article that make it so good it is impossible for it to be made any better, even in common things like batter cakes and biscuits, and no person living can guess them and always be up to the highest mark. Cup and spoon measure. Cooks who go to places where there are no scales to use will find the following table useful. A cup means the common size of a white coffee cup generally used in hotels that holds half a pint. Water. A pint is a pound all the world round, and the standard. A cup being half pint is therefore 8 ounces. Milk, vinegar, and most fluids, same as water. Molasses. A cup holds 12 ounces, a basting spoon 2 ounces. Thin syrups do not weigh so heavy. Eggs. A cup of eggs broken is the same as 5 eggs. Yolks. A cup holds 13 yolks, half pound. Whites. A cup holds 9 whites, half pound. Whole eggs. 10 average a pound. When you have a bowl of yolks or whites left over, weigh or measure and you will know how many there are. Butter. A cup of butter is 7.5 ounces if pressed in solid. It is near enough generally to call 2 cups of butter a pound, either pressed in or melted. Lard. Same as butter. Suet. Minced suet a cup is 4 ounces. Chocolate. Grated cold chocolate a cup is 3 ounces. Sugar. A level cup of granulated sugar is 7 ounces. Although sugar by the grain is heavier than water, the air space makes it lighter. A rounded cup is half pound. Fine icing sugar a cup is but 6 ounces. Dry yellow the same. All the sugar that can be scooped up out of a barrel with a cup weighs 9 ounces. Breadcrumbs. A cup of bread, pressed in rather solid, is 4 ounces. A pound is a pressed in quart. Flour. A level cup of flour is 4 ounces. A cup, heaped up with all that can be dipped with it out of a barrel, weighs 7 ounces, nearly twice the level full. A quart of flour just rounded over is a pound. Cornmeal. A cup of cornmeal is 5 ounces. 3 rounded cups are a pound. A pound is a little less than a level quart. Oatmeal. A level cup is 6 ounces. All that can be dipped up with a cup weighs 7 ounces, nearly half pound. 3 cups water cooks 1 cup oatmeal. Rice. A level cup weighs 7 ounces. All that can be heaped in a cup weighs 9 ounces. 3 cups water cooks 1 cup rice. Cornstarch. A level cup of cooking starch is 6 ounces. All that can be heaped in a cup weighs 7 ounces. 4 cups milk cooks 1 cup starch. Farina. Same as starch. Tapioca. Same as rice. Light bread dough. A rounded cup of dough weighs from 6 to 8 ounces according to lightness. 3 cups are a pound. 1 pound makes 10 or 12 rolls. Raisins. A heaped cup without stems is 8 ounces. A pound without stems fills a quart. Currants. A heaped cup dry weighs 6 ounces. Ground coffee. A heaping cup is 4 ounces. It makes 2 quarts of coffee. Tea. A heaping cup is 2 ounces. It makes 4 quarts of tea. Oysters. A cup holds a dozen selects or 2 dozen small. A basting spoon. 6 basting spoons of liquid fill a cup. It holds about ½ ounces of melted butter or lard, same as size of an egg, and 2 ounces of thick molasses. A tablespoon, 14 times quite full as a cup or ½ pint. 2 tablespoons butter is 1 ounce melted. A heaping tablespoon of sugar is 1 ounce. 6 or 7 fill a cup. A heaping tablespoon of starch is 1 ounce. 4 will fill a cup. Starch can be heaped so much higher than sugar. A moderately heaped tablespoon of flour is 1 ounce. 3 will fill a cup if fully heaped. A teaspoon is ½ a tablespoon. It is near enough in most cases to call a teaspoonful ½ ounce of dry articles rounded up, not including ground coffee or tea. Apples. 4 average a pound. They lose 1/3 by paring. Butter. Size of an egg is anything from 1 to 2 ounces. There are 16 cups in a gallon. A common wooden pail holds 2½ gallons, or 10 quarts, or 40 cups. Bisque ice creams. Sometimes called biscuit ices in the bills of fare, are those which have a paste of fruit or nuts mixed with the cream. Bisque of pineapple is one of the favorite varieties. The directions for making it are at numbers 107 and 93. Another example of the bisque of nuts of any kind at 95, and preserved or candied ginger makes another. There should be bits of minced fruit found in the ice to show what it is, and that it is not merely flavored. Italian bisque has ladyfingers crumbled and moistened in wine, mixed in ice cream the same way. Nesselrode ice pudding and diplomatic ice pudding will be found at numbers 689 and 690. Sweet dreams.